In 2007, in Memphis, Tennessee, a group of former military operatives meticulously planned one of the most daring heists in modern history. Their leader, Isaiah Z. Caldwell, was a former captain in the Army Corps of Engineers, a master tactician with expertise in explosives and structural sabotage. Alongside him stood 4 men, each bringing a critical skill set to the operation. Lorenzo Lowe Harris, a former Special Forces operative, possessed exceptional marksmanship and combat experience. Raymond Ray Brooks was a genius with electronics and security systems. Jamal White specialized in fast getaways and escape planning, while Kevin K. Dixon excelled in disguise, surveillance, and infiltration. The target was the Central Bank of Memphis, a well-secured institution housing vast amounts of cash reserves. Unlike common robbers who acted on impulse, Zay's team devoted over a year to preparation. They studied every facet of the bank's security, its armored transport schedules, employee routines, camera placements, and alarm triggers. They acquired blueprints, learning the layout of vaults, access points, and emergency exits. Each team member rehearsed their role, ensuring precision in execution. For months, they observed cash deliveries and withdrawals, noting peak security hours and vulnerabilities. They tracked how long armored trucks stayed at the loading dock, how often security guards rotated shifts, and when the night staff took breaks. They also identified weaknesses in the building's alarm system, realizing that the secondary backup only activated under specific conditions. The team exploited this oversight in their plan. In the weeks leading up to the heist, they procured high-grade equipment, thermal drills, EMP devices to disable cameras temporarily, encrypted radios, and forged identification cards. They stole unregistered vehicles, stripping them of GPS trackers and modifying them for a swift getaway. Every contingency was considered, from alternate escape routes to emergency cover stories if any of them were caught separately. They operated with military precision, knowing that even the smallest miscalculation could be disastrous. The night before the job, the 5 men gathered in an abandoned aircraft hangar on the outskirts of the city. The atmosphere was tense but controlled. Zay, ever the strategist, reminded them of their roles, ensuring that no detail had been overlooked. There was no room for second-guessing. Each man understood that failure was not an option. They would have exactly 20 minutes inside the bank, any longer, and the risk of law enforcement intervention would skyrocket. They struck just after midnight, timing their entrance to coincide with a scheduled system reboot of the bank's primary security servers. Wearing tactical gear and masks, they moved with precision. Ray disabled the external alarm grid, using a frequency jammer to cut off communication between the bank and the local security monitoring center. Meanwhile, Dixon and Harris overpowered the 2 night guards, restraining them with zip ties and placing them in a soundproof maintenance room. Zay and White proceeded to the vault, navigating the corridors as rehearsed. Using an industrial-grade thermal drill, they breached the lock within minutes. Inside, stacks of freshly delivered cash awaited them. Working swiftly, they loaded duffel bags with nearly $20 million in $100 bills. Every movement was calculated, every second accounted for. With the money secured, they executed their exit strategy flawlessly. White had disabled the parking garage's security cameras beforehand, allowing them to slip through the underground service tunnel undetected. By the time the police responded to the silent alarm, the team had already vanished into the night, splitting into separate vehicles to avoid detection. Authorities were left baffled. The bank's security footage revealed nothing of use. Each man had worn specialized masks that blocked facial recognition. No fingerprints were found, no witnesses could identify them, and no trace of the stolen money appeared in circulation. News outlets dubbed the crime the Vanishing Millions, a heist so meticulously planned that investigators had no leads. The team had agreed to lay low for at least a year, avoiding unnecessary risks. Each member took their share, storing it in untraceable offshore accounts, hiding it in safe houses, or converting it into assets. They knew that premature spending would raise suspicions. Trust was paramount, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. A plan executed with military precision had left them rich beyond their dreams, but wealth often bred greed, and not all men could resist temptation. For now, they remained ghosts, but ghosts had a way of being hunted. A year had passed since the Central Bank of Memphis heist, and the case remained a mystery to law enforcement. Despite exhaustive investigations, endless interrogations, and a nationwide hunt, the FBI and Memphis police had no viable suspects. The crew had executed their plan flawlessly, leaving no forensic evidence, no digital footprints, and no traceable financial activity. Each member of the group lived under strict self-imposed exile. They avoided flashy purchases, refrained from contact with one another, and changed locations frequently. The money was carefully hidden, some stored in offshore accounts under layers of fake identities, some kept in unregistered safe deposit boxes, and some converted into valuable assets such as gold, real estate, or art. They knew that even the slightest mistake could bring everything crashing down. Isaiah Z. Caldwell had gone completely dark. He had always been the most disciplined of the group, and his military training made him an expert at disappearing. Using forged documents, he moved between safe houses across different states, always staying one step ahead of anyone who might be watching. He avoided using the money entirely, surviving on what he had before the heist, making sure that no one could connect him to any sudden wealth. Lorenzo Harris had relocated to Miami, blending into the city's vibrant nightlife. He operated under a new identity, working as a security consultant, a legitimate front that gave him access to more cash-heavy businesses. He never spent recklessly, never stayed in one place too long, and never trusted anyone outside the crew. Raymond Brooks had settled on the West Coast, using his knowledge of electronics to work in underground tech circles. He kept his transactions anonymous, dealing in cryptocurrency and untraceable digital assets. His discipline rivaled Zay's, and he never left a paper trail. Kevin Dixon had changed his entire appearance, adopting a new name and moving across state lines frequently. He had always been the most adaptable of the group, and his skills in disguise allowed him to blend into new environments seamlessly. But Jamal White was different. He had never been patient, and the temptation of fast money proved to be his undoing. While the others exercised caution, Jamal saw his share of the heist as a means to build an empire. He started moving large amounts of cash through shell companies, hoping to clean the money and invest in high-profit businesses. He wanted more power, more influence, more recognition. It did not take long for federal investigators to notice. Financial transactions that should have been invisible suddenly triggered red flags. A routine audit of suspicious corporate activity connected to a fraudulent real estate firm in Dallas led authorities to a trail of inconsistencies. Further digging exposed a network of dummy corporations tied to unregistered offshore accounts. Investigators didn't know who they were looking for, but they knew they had found something big. Jamal was arrested in a quiet motel on the outskirts of Chicago. He had been careless, underestimating the reach of federal surveillance. Within hours, he found himself in a cold, windowless interrogation room, facing an impossible choice. The FBI knew they had caught someone tied to something larger. They didn't have solid evidence linking him to the heist, but they had enough to keep him locked up for decades on financial crimes alone. Instead of pressing him with threats of prison time, they made him an offer, his freedom, a new identity, and complete immunity in exchange for names. Jamal hesitated, but not for long. Self-preservation had always been his instinct. He convinced himself that the others would have done the same in his position. He signed the agreement. Within days, the FBI had arrest warrants prepared, and the hunt began. Lorenzo Harris was the first to fall. Agents stormed his Miami condo in a pre-dawn raid, breaking down the door before he could react. They found him in bed, barely reaching for the weapon he kept under his pillow before he was pinned to the ground. Raymond Brooks was caught leaving a secure storage unit in Los Angeles. The FBI had traced one of Jamal's offshore accounts to a transaction that led them straight to him. Surveillance teams had followed his movements for weeks, waiting for the right moment to move in. He never saw them coming. Kevin Dixon almost got away. His natural instincts for escape had served him well, and he had sensed something was off for days. But the FBI had been tracking him through his last known alias, and an informant tipped them off. He was taken down in a gas station parking lot in Denver, barely managing to throw away his burner phone before being surrounded. Isaiah Caldwell was the last one standing. He had always been the most cautious, the most elusive. By the time the FBI reached his known safe houses, he was already gone. Agents pursued him across multiple states, using every resource available, but he remained ahead of them, never staying anywhere for too long, never using the same identity twice. But even the best plans had limits. His luck ran out in Atlanta. A routine traffic stop escalated when officers, unknowingly pulling over one of the most wanted fugitives in the country, realized something wasn't right. A fake ID, a nervous response, small details that led to a closer inspection. Within minutes, a call was made, and a specialized tactical unit was dispatched. The city went into lockdown as law enforcement moved in. Zay fought. He ran, using back alleys and underground pathways, but the net had already closed around him. SWAT teams blocked every possible escape route. He was cornered in an abandoned warehouse, his only option surrender. He was taken into custody without a single shot fired, but his eyes showed no fear, no regret. The trial was swift and brutal. Jamal White testified under full immunity, providing every detail necessary to secure convictions. The evidence piled up, and the sentences were severe. Lorenzo, Raymond, and Kevin each received prison terms ranging from 20 years to life without parole. Isaiah Caldwell, as the mastermind of the heist, faced the harshest judgment. The court showed no leniency. He was sentenced to life in federal prison, with no possibility of release. Jamal White disappeared into the witness protection program, his name and past erased. But Isaiah Caldwell was not broken. He had lost his freedom, his fortune, and his brothers in arms. Yet something in him remained untouched. He had survived worse, and deep down, he knew this was not the end. Isaiah Caldwell was transferred to Riverside Correctional Facility in Louisiana, a maximum security prison designed to hold the most dangerous and high-profile criminals in the country. Located in a remote region, surrounded by miles of dense swamp and razor wire fences, the prison had a reputation for being inescapable. The walls were lined with motion detectors, surveillance cameras covered every corridor, and guard towers loomed over the yard with armed officers watching every movement. From the moment he arrived, Caldwell knew that escape would be nearly impossible. Almost. He spent the first few months in complete silence, never reacting, never resisting, never drawing unnecessary attention. He followed the routine, moved when instructed, ate when given food, and remained unreadable to both guards and inmates alike. But beneath his calm demeanor, he was studying. Every day, every shift change, every blind spot in the surveillance grid, he absorbed it all like a soldier preparing for war. He took note of which guards were lazy and which ones were strict. He memorized patrol patterns, learned the precise times when security sweeps occurred, and identified the weaknesses in the electronic systems. The prison ran on schedules, and schedules meant predictability. It was only a matter of time before he found a way to exploit that. While most inmates spent their days biding time, Caldwell observed the facility's infrastructure. He watched how maintenance crews moved in and out, how supplies were brought in, how emergency procedures were conducted. He paid close attention to the ventilation shafts, the wiring along the ceilings, and the reinforced steel doors leading to restricted areas. But what interested him the most was the prison's fire suppression system. Unlike the security measures, which were near impenetrable, the emergency protocols relied on old mechanisms, ones that he could manipulate. Using his background in engineering and explosives, he began gathering materials. It took months of patience. He scavenged for pieces of metal, smuggled small amounts of cleaning chemicals, and traded with inmates for specific supplies. He fashioned a makeshift explosive device, crude but effective enough to create a necessary distraction. The night of the escape was carefully chosen. A storm was rolling in, heavy rain and lightning providing the perfect cover for any sounds or power fluctuations. Just past midnight, as most of the guards rotated shifts and fatigue set in, Caldwell set his plan into motion. He activated the fire alarm in the eastern wing of the prison by igniting a small chemical reaction inside a supply closet. The smoke sensors triggered an immediate lockdown response, sending guards scrambling to contain what they believed was an electrical fire. Panic spread as inmates took advantage of the confusion, banging on their doors and shouting, adding to the chaos. Caldwell had already positioned himself near an air vent that led to the maintenance tunnels beneath the facility. The vent was usually sealed, but earlier that week, he had loosened the screws during a routine cleaning shift, ensuring it could be removed without tools. As sirens blared, he climbed inside and navigated through the narrow ducts, avoiding pressure-sensitive plates and security triggers. Emerging inside a locked storage room, he used a stolen keycard, acquired from a careless guard weeks prior, to access a restricted hallway. He moved quickly but methodically, knowing exactly how much time he had before the guards regained control of the situation. The final obstacle was the underground utility tunnel, an access point used by maintenance workers to service the prison's plumbing and electrical grids. The tunnel led to a drainage pipe that emptied into the swamp surrounding the facility. It was heavily secured, but Caldwell had accounted for that. Using the last of his improvised explosives, he rigged a small blast near the electronic control panel, short-circuiting the locking mechanism. The explosion was subtle, masked by the ongoing fire alarms and distant shouting of guards trying to contain the riot upstairs. He slipped into the tunnel just as the lockdown procedures reactivated the prison's security grid. By the time guards realized he was missing, he was already knee-deep in murky swamp water, moving through the darkness like a ghost. A full-scale manhunt followed. The FBI, U.S. Marshals, and local law enforcement launched one of the largest fugitive searches in recent history. Helicopters scanned the area with thermal imaging, K-9 units combed the forests, and roadblocks were set up across the state. But Caldwell was no ordinary escapee. He had spent his entire life preparing for survival under extreme conditions. He knew how to navigate the terrain without leaving a trace, how to mislead search teams, how to use the elements to his advantage. He disappeared into the wilderness, leaving behind nothing but an empty cell and a trail of unanswered questions. 2 weeks later, the first body was found. The hunt for Caldwell had only just begun. Jamal White had been living under a new identity in Seattle, far from the chaos he had left behind. His cooperation with the FBI had granted him immunity, a fresh start, and a clean slate. But freedom did not erase fear. He had changed his name, altered his appearance, and cut ties with everyone from his past, yet deep down, he knew it was never over. He moved constantly, avoiding routines, always looking over his shoulder. He stayed in mid-range hotels, never using the same place twice in a row, never lingering in one city too long. On a cold November evening, he checked into a small but well-rated business hotel in downtown Seattle. He paid in cash, as he often did, leaving no digital footprint. The clerk barely noticed him, another faceless traveler in a city that never asked too many questions. The room was standard, clean, unremarkable. A single window overlooked a quiet street, a door that locked automatically, and a security latch he always used out of habit. The next morning, he did not check out. Housekeeping knocked several times. When there was no response, the staff used the master key to enter. They found him lying on the bed, fully clothed, arms at his sides, eyes open but lifeless. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no indication of violence. The room was undisturbed, everything in its place except for one object left deliberately on the nightstand, a folded map of Memphis. A single mark had been made in red ink, circling the location of the central bank. The paramedics who arrived first suspected a heart attack. He had no history of health problems, but unexpected cardiac events were not uncommon. The assumption changed when the toxicology report came back. A foreign substance was detected in his bloodstream, something neither the coroner nor the hospital's toxicology department could fully identify. The compound was unlike anything cataloged in standard forensic databases. It acted quickly, shutting down vital organs without causing visible distress, leaving behind no typical chemical traces. The FBI received the report within hours. To them, it was clear this was not an accident. White had been found in a locked room with no sign of forced entry, no defensive wounds, and a method of poisoning so precise that it left no immediate cause of suspicion. The placement of the map was deliberate, a message sent with surgical precision. There was only one person they could think of who had both the motive and the ability to execute something this clean. Lorenzo Harris was still behind bars, serving his sentence in a high-security federal prison. His days were routine, his movements restricted, but even he could feel the shift in the air after White's death. The guards were more alert, the prison officials on edge. He had always been careful, always kept his head down, but now he was being watched. He knew exactly why. Inside the prison, rumors spread fast. Word of White's death reached Harris within a day, and he understood what it meant. He had known Caldwell for years, fought alongside him, trusted him. He had also betrayed him. And now, it was only a matter of time. For weeks, he remained cautious, never turning his back, never sitting with the same group twice, never sleeping without a weapon within reach. But in prison, patience always won over paranoia. It happened in the recreation yard, a place where inmates moved freely under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Fights were common, gang disputes erupted often, and most attacks blended into the usual violence of the prison system. Harris had been careful, but he could not predict everything. A commotion broke out near the weight benches, drawing the attention of nearby guards. As they moved to break it up, another man, one Harris had never seen before, approached from behind. He moved with purpose, his expression blank, his hand steady. The shank was small, sharpened from a piece of metal smuggled in from the machine shop. The first stab punctured Harris's kidney, the second tore through his ribs, and the third went deep into his abdomen. The attack lasted less than 5 seconds. The assailant disappeared into the chaos, blending back into the crowd before the guards could react. Harris staggered forward, blood pooling around his feet. He tried to speak, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The world blurred as his vision darkened, but he forced one word past his lips before collapsing onto the pavement. Zay. By the time the guards restored order, he was gone. The official report classified it as a gang-related attack, another casualty of prison violence. But the FBI knew better. 2 former members of the crew were now dead under circumstances too precise to be coincidence. The remaining members of the group were placed under heightened security. Their locations were changed, their routines disrupted. Every move was monitored, every contact traced. Protection orders were issued, surveillance was increased. But none of it would matter. Isaiah Caldwell had never been stopped by barriers, security systems, or armed guards. He had always been patient, methodical, and relentless. The first 2 had been warnings. The real hunt had only just begun. Raymond Brooks had done everything right. After Lorenzo Harris's death, he knew there was no escaping what was coming. He had seen the reports, read between the lines, understood the precision behind each strike. The deaths of Jamal White and Harris weren't random, nor were they the result of bad luck. They were methodical, planned, and most importantly, personal. Brooks had always been a survivor. He prided himself on his ability to stay ahead, to predict threats before they reached him. After White's betrayal, he had abandoned his old life, taken on a new identity, and relocated to the outskirts of Houston, Texas. He avoided technology, using cash whenever possible. He changed cars frequently, never slept in the same motel twice, and never told anyone where he was going next. But despite his best efforts, he felt the noose tightening. He could sense it in the way strangers glanced at him a second too long, in the way the paranoia never faded, even when he was alone. He kept a pistol within arm's reach at all times, double-checked every lock before sleeping, and studied exit routes wherever he went. It wasn't enough. Late one evening, Brooks left a bar just outside El Paso, heading toward a motel off the highway. The road stretched long and empty, a black ribbon cutting through the Texas desert. The sky was dark, and the only lights came from the faint glow of distant towns on the horizon. His car was an old sedan, one he had purchased under a fake name, swapped out for another weeks ago. He was less than 10 miles from his destination when it happened. As he pressed the brake pedal to slow for a curve, nothing responded. The pedal sank to the floor, useless. Panic surged through him as the car picked up speed. The road twisted sharply ahead, a steep drop-off on the right side. He yanked the emergency brake, but it had been tampered with as well. The steering felt loose, unresponsive. Someone had planned this. Brooks fought for control, but the car veered off the road, hurtling toward the ravine. The last thing he saw was the flash of a reflective road sign before the vehicle flipped, rolling violently down the embankment. Metal crumpled, glass shattered, and silence followed. When the authorities arrived, they assumed it was another case of reckless driving on a dangerous stretch of road. It wasn't until investigators examined the wreckage that they found the truth. The brake lines had been cut, the emergency system disabled. Someone had made sure Brooks never had a chance. By the time the news reached the FBI, they already knew what it meant. There was only one target left. Kevin Dixon had been prepared for this. After White's cooperation with law enforcement, he had gone into hiding under federal protection. Unlike the others, he had government resources on his side. He was moved every few days, never staying in one place long enough to be tracked. The agents watching over him were professionals, ex-military, trained in counter-surveillance. He followed every protocol, trusted no one, and lived in a constant state of vigilance. But deep down, he knew none of it would be enough. The deaths of White, Harris, and Brooks had proven that Isaiah Caldwell was more than just a fugitive. He was a hunter, and no amount of security would stop him. Dixon barely slept, constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the inevitable. One night, in a small motel in Arizona, the inevitable found him. His phone vibrated once, a single notification. It was an unknown number, no caller ID. He hesitated before opening the message. Betrayal is forgiven, but never forgotten. A cold wave of fear washed over him. He stood immediately, heart pounding, scanning the room. The door was locked, the windows shut. The FBI team was stationed outside, unaware of the message. He reached for his gun, his hands shaking. He never heard the shot. A single suppressed round pierced the motel window, striking him clean in the back of the head. He collapsed instantly, dead before he hit the floor. The shot had been perfect, precise, efficient, with no wasted movement. By the time the agents outside realized something was wrong, the shooter was already gone. The only trace left behind was a faint footprint on the motel's windowsill, a sign that someone had been there, just long enough to finish what had been started. The FBI scrambled to respond, launching the largest manhunt yet, but it was too late. Dixon was the last piece of unfinished business, and now there was no one left to betray Isaiah Caldwell. The revenge had been completed with surgical precision. Each target had been eliminated in a way that left no doubt about the message being sent. This was not just about punishment. It was about control. Caldwell had taken everything back, on his terms. Now, there was only one question left. Where had he gone? Isaiah Caldwell had become more than just a fugitive. He was a ghost, a legend whispered about in law enforcement circles, a name that carried the weight of calculated vengeance and meticulous precision. The FBI had no illusions about what they were dealing with. This was not a desperate man running from the law. This was a trained operative who had erased every trace of his existence, leaving behind only bodies and unanswered questions. Within hours of Kevin Dixon's murder, Caldwell was officially declared the FBI's most wanted man. His name was broadcast across every law enforcement database, his face plastered on news reports, digital billboards, and security bulletins nationwide. His criminal profile was analyzed by the most experienced profilers in the Bureau, dissected for patterns, vulnerabilities, anything that could give investigators a lead. They found nothing. Every possible alias was flagged, every known associate interrogated. Airport watch lists, border checkpoints, and surveillance networks were mobilized, but it was as if Caldwell had disappeared the moment Dixon's body hit the motel floor. The hunt for him expanded beyond state lines, reaching international agencies. If he had fled the country, they would know. But days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of movement. The FBI raided every safe house they suspected he might have used. They combed through bank records, digital transactions, and old military contacts. Nothing. Caldwell had always been careful, and now, he was more than just careful, he was invisible. The only clue left behind was a message. It was found in a hidden compartment inside one of Dixon's personal storage lockers, a place the FBI had only discovered after weeks of investigating. The compartment was expertly concealed, the kind of thing that could only be noticed by someone who knew exactly where to look. Inside, there was no money, no weapons, nothing of practical use, just a single sheet of paper, handwritten in precise, even strokes. You forgot who you were dealing with. Now I am free again. Next time, choose your friends more carefully. The message was clear. Caldwell had not just escaped, he had finished what he set out to do. Every person who had betrayed him was gone. There was nothing left to tie him down, nothing left to chase. The FBI pored over the letter for weeks, hoping to decode hidden meanings, searching for something, anything, that might hint at his next move. Was he mocking them? Leaving a breadcrumb trail? Or was it a genuine farewell, a final note before vanishing forever? Speculation ran wild. Some believed he had assumed a new identity, living quietly in another country, blending into the world as just another nameless face. Others thought he had gone underground, waiting, preparing for something else. There were rumors, sightings in different states, whispers of a man fitting his description seen in the shadows of backwater towns, but none were confirmed. Law enforcement remained on high alert. They monitored financial markets for any sign of his stolen money re-entering circulation. They tracked gun sales, rental properties, and unregistered vehicles, looking for patterns that might suggest his return. But every search led to dead ends. Caldwell had spent years planning the heist, months orchestrating his revenge, and now, he had done what no one believed possible, he had disappeared without a trace. For the Bureau, the frustration was unbearable. No one simply vanished, not in the modern world, not with the level of surveillance and technology at their disposal. But Caldwell had proven time and time again that he was not like anyone else. The case remained open indefinitely. Caldwell's file was updated regularly, his profile expanded with every theoretical possibility of where he might have gone. His face remained on the most wanted list, but eventually, the urgency faded. New criminals took priority, new threats demanded attention. Caldwell became a ghost story, a cautionary tale for law enforcement, a symbol of what happened when someone with the right training and the wrong motivation was pushed too far. Some agents believed he was still out there, watching. Others thought he had retired, satisfied that justice, his version of it, had been served. But one thing was certain. Isaiah Caldwell never forgot a betrayal. And if he ever returned, the world would know.